We're here in New York for the Speedy Tuesday Event, and today we're also interviewing Terry Virts, Space Shuttle astronaut and temporary resident of the International Space Station.
Yes, a few months.
A few months. And before I get back to that, this year marks the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, and I was wondering, what does that mean to you personally or as an astronaut?
Right. Apollo is why I became an astronaut and lived the life that I lived. The first book I ever read was about Apollo when I was a kid in kindergarten. And growing up, I knew all the astronauts. I knew every mission, and I just fell in love. Grew up with pictures of space on my wall of my bedroom. So eventually I read The Right Stuff, which is a great book, and that kind of told you how to become an astronaut. So I ended up being a fighter pilot, test pilot, and astronaut. But for me, Apollo has been kind of what determined my life.
You just briefly went through the whole process.
Right.
Can you explain how you became an astronaut? Could not be that easy.
It's not right. I made it sound easy. So you have several different options. You can either be a pilot, which was the route I took. We have doctors, engineers, scientists. There's a couple different paths at NASA. Now there's these private companies where you just need $250,000 and you can become an astronaut. But for me, I took the pilot route. So I was an F-16 pilot, flew F-16s around the world. Was a test pilot for a short amount of time, and then got picked right after becoming a test pilot. So I spent 16 years in NASA in total.
And how do you get picked? What do they look for? Or did you have to sign up at first?
Yeah, you have to apply. Yeah. So a lot of people want to become astronauts. Yeah. In fact, this last class, 18,000 people applied.
Wow.
So, yes, wow, it was a lot. It was a long process. So back in the day, I used paper. Nowadays, it's all online. But I had this thick stack of paper for my application. And initially, you just send in your application, and they go through, this guy looks good. And then they start to interview your references. Yeah. So I say, this boss and that boss are my references. And then they start getting called. And then you find out. So you're like, I made it through the next round.
Yeah.
And then, if that goes well, then they bring you down to Houston for an interview.
Yeah.
For me, it was a week-long interview where it was mostly medical testing, but they're also watching you, just to see how you interact, see how you treat the secretary when you're with the driver. Because some guys, it's all about personality tests. By that point, there was 120 of us, I think, and everybody was smart, top of their field. At that point, the NASA's just trying to see, do you want to spend months and months in a can with that person?
Okay.
So it really came down, I think, to personality and also medical. Okay. When they do this in-depth medical test where every organ gets tested, and some people find out they only have one kidney, or they find out they have cancer, stuff you never get checked when you're 30-year-old old and healthy. So it was a pretty in-depth process.
Yeah. So you flew Space Shuttle and you flew Soyuz to the International Space Station.
I did both.
What's the difference between those two spacecrafts when you have a liftoff? Is there a difference?
The liftoff itself is different. The shuttle had so much force, 3 million kilograms, so 7 million pounds of force, and those big solid rocket motors vibrate. Yeah. Solid rocket fuel has a lot of vibration in it, and it was like just grabbing you and shaking you as hard as I can is what it felt like.
Yeah.
And the noise is amazing. The noise actually sounded similar, but the shuttle is just more of it. I mean, the Soyuz is a big rocket. It's a 1 million pound rocket, but the shuttle is like a 4 million pound rocket.
Yeah.
So the other big thing is I had a window. I was like the pilot, so I was surrounded by, like an airliner. I had windows. The Soyuz, you can't see anything. You're inside of a metal can to protect the capsule.
Yeah.
So you're just along for the ride. You're in an ICBM. Where the nuclear warhead would be, they took that out and put a seat in for the astronauts or cosmonauts. So,
okay. And during both trips, basically, did you use the Speedmaster X-33?
Oh yeah. The X-33 was my way to manage time for over 7 months in space. Yeah. It has really cool. It has great features like countdown timers. You can set alarms for specific activities you're doing. You can have a UTC, GMT and also local time.
Yeah.
It has a mission elapsed time function on the shuttle, which was really important. So time since takeoff.
Yeah.
It had an alarm, so every morning that the beep 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 from the watch was how it was my alarm clock for 7 months. So basically, every way that I managed time and running procedures was done on my X33.
Okay. And for viewers out there and Speedmaster fans, it was a Generation 2.
It was a Generation 2, yeah. So my crewmate, Samantha Christopheretti, works for ESA, the European Space Agency. So Jean-Francois Pervat, former ESA astronaut, helped develop Generation 3. So this is a Gen 3.
Yeah.
So she had this in space, but I had the Gen 2 in space.
Did you do some comparison of the watches in space or not at all?
We did. The Gen 2 is a little bit, the Gen 3 has more timers, the Gen 2 is a little bit more simpler. So Gen 2 was great for me. It was all I needed or wanted. But Gen 3, I think there's 2 or 3 different phase elapsed timers, and there's several different alarms, and you can be tracking like 5 different things at the same time on this watch. So it's pretty capable.
And do you have a special connection with the watches that flew with you?
I do. On my first flight, I bought NASA doesn't give you a watch, so I bought my own watch with the titanium band. And, it's just like, and I had it engraved, SCS-130 pilot. It was really personal. It's a really cool thing. And I flew some other watches, not Omegas, because I gave my son a watch and my father a watch.
Okay.
But on a government salary, I couldn't buy all those Omega watches, so they were not Omegas. But just having a watch, especially my X33, is very, very special.
Yeah. Okay. And now you are an ambassador for Omega.
I am.
And which models do you find to be interesting for you?
Right. So they have lots of great models. I mean, I love the Seamaster, but the Speedmaster is kind of that's the one close to me because that's the one I flew in space. I also had the original Moonwatch to go with the Russian spacesuit. So the Russian, any spacesuit, if you are in vacuum, it fills up, so it puffs out.
Yeah. So
the Russians, we had a Moonwatch that was on the outside of the spacesuit with a flexible band. So as it inflated, it could still be there. And that was your only timing instrument, if you had an emergency and ended up in a vacuum. But the Speedmaster is just, I like it. It's a cool looking watch. And it's my favorite.
And the Speedmaster was attached to the spacesuit. It stayed attached, or could you bring it with you?
No, I have it at home. No, that one.
Okay,
I have that one. Yeah.
And so it sounds that you have a little collection.
I have a little collection. I've got 6, 5 Speedmasters and a Seamaster. Yeah.
Okay. And the Seamaster is the new one, the 300M.
The new one, yeah.
You like it?
I like it. It's just a cool looking watch. It's blue and silver, and it's got the waves. I think it's a really cool watch.
Were you aware of this watch that it has a connection to James Bond, for example? Or something that grew later on you, becoming an ambassador?
So I guess I've always known that James Bond had an Omega, in the same way that I knew that astronauts had Omegas.
Yeah.
Through their advertising, it was something I was aware of.
Yeah.
But the Seamaster I picked out, I went, man, that's a beautiful watch. It's gorgeous. I want that watch. And then it's the same one that Daniel Craig wore in the last James Bond movie. He's holding a pole and going underwater in that picture. And the Gregory Kissling here is the one who designed it and did that shoot. So we were having a talk about that. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And do you also keep track of what's happening now? Have you become a watch enthusiast a bit? Or
absolutely, much more. In fact, I'm looking forward this afternoon. We have like a product briefing. They're going to talk about the new things.
Yeah.
I am a lot more aware now of watches and the technology that they have, which is pretty amazing. The way that you can keep time with a small instrument.
Yeah.
You never have to wind it. You have the automatic. They have the technology to not be affected by magnetic fields. It's an amazing way. It's like a classic way to keep time. I mean, iPhones are fine. You look at it and it's time, but this is just a classic way to keep time.
Exactly. And as a child, you were already aware of Apollo, followed the missions. When were you aware that the astronauts were wearing Speedmaster or the Moonwatch?
Right. I was actually too young to know anything about Apollo. Like, I learned about it as history, not while it was happening. But I think, I don't remember the exact moment. I just remember seeing Omega advertisements. It must have been in magazines, or at the mall, or were at the airport, you'd see the picture of Buzz Aldrin standing there and Omega.
Yeah.
So I think it's through their advertising campaign. It worked because my whole life I've been aware that Omega is the astronaut watch.
Yeah. Okay. One last question. Can you tell us something about your book, View from Above?
Yes.
And can you tell us something about the new project you're talking about?
So my first book that I wrote is when I left NASA a couple years ago. I knew I wanted to write a book, so I jumped right in. It's a National Geographic photography book, but it also has stories. I try to take a space mission and put it into book format. So that's View from Above.
Yeah.
I think the photographs are pretty cool, but the stories, for me, the stories are even more important because I wrote it. I didn't have a ghostwriter. I didn't have whatever. I think many astronaut books that you read are not written by the astronaut, and when I was in school, I was probably the least likely to write a book. That was not my forte, but I really have fallen in love with writing. I'm writing another book right now called The Art of Space Travel. It'll come out next year.
Okay.
But this other project I'm doing is we took the Apollo 11 flight plan and reproduced it. It's a very limited edition. The company that does our head of state gifts, so for the last 3 or 4 decades, when the American president goes to visit the Pope or the Queen or the president of France or China, whatever, they make the gifts that he gives. So they do, I think, the best work in the world. And so we have this, we only made a few hundred Apollo flight plan, but it's in Italian leather and 23 karat gold. It's really spectacular. It was just a kind of a side project. A friend of mine and I said, look, it's the 50th anniversary. This is an amazing opportunity. Let's just do it. So we kind of did it on blind faith, but it came out really spectacular.
And how can people order your book, View from Above? And how can people order your
flight plan? View from Above is at bookstores, on Amazon, on whatever country you're in. Yeah. It just came out in Chinese language, actually.
Okay.
I think it's in German and Italian. It's in a couple different languages. Okay. And then ApolloFlightPlan.com is the Apollo flight plan. So.
And it's ready for order. People can
we finally got it done right in time for the anniversary, so it's ready. We can ship it. We're doing FedEx, so ApolloFlightPlan.com is where that is.
Okay, good. Thank you for
the
interview. Yeah.
Good.